The most important part of like where you should start is simply looking at the spreadsheets. Obviously, you'll be able to download this. What are these 320 assessment objectives? And having your team, not just IT, like some of these things are obviously IT related, but there's things that are ops related, there's HR related stuff. It's kind of like all different functions within the company. And everybody within the committee, within your company, should go through the spreadsheet. It's extremely boring, but you just have to do it. You just have to do it. It's extremely boring and it's going to be time consuming to go through essentially 320 rows on a spreadsheet and determine like, all right, guys, do we really think we did this?
Welcome to Trust Issue by BEMO, the podcast where we go beyond checkbox compliance and get real about security. In every episode, we will break down what's happening in the world of CMMC, cybersecurity, and GRC, straight from the people building, auditing, and living it. Real conversation about real security.
All right. Welcome back to Trust Issues, where we walk you through mostly CMMC Level 2 type stuff. On today's episode, what I'm going to show you is where to start in your research when it comes to CMMC Level 2 compliance. There's a lot of people I meet with who are like, I've been talking to like 5 different vendors, a SIM vendor, Microsoft vendor. I've been talking to C3PAO. They all tell me different things. I don't know where to start. Like, I'm so overwhelmed. Like, I can't really make sense of this. And so what I've decided to do is thought we just kind of walk you through kind of like a flow down, kind of just a simple flow chart around like where to get started, kind of working your way backwards from assessment. Like where do I just start? The very first thing I would start is with the 320 assessment objectives, right? This is a very basic spreadsheet. In that spreadsheet, you basically just have all the controls and all the assessment objectives on what you have to do exactly line by line, right? So if I start off, right, back to the top, I think most of you are familiar with CMMC being the execution layer of NIST 800-171 revision 2, right? It's simply an enforcement mandate that you all have to go do that, right? If I pull up my spreadsheet, what is NIST 800-171 basically, right? So you have these 110 controls, and here I have them classified by NIST family. Within the 110 controls, you have kind of different topics that you have to go do, have to enforce, prove, show, etc. Things like access control. How do you access tools? How do you make sure that people who shouldn't have access to tools can't access them? What's your policy for access control? How do you prove it to an auditor? What evidence do you have to collect, right? All that stuff. You have your 110 controls. There are 320 assessment objectives related to those 110 controls. And so we'll kind of just talk about like, what's the difference between those two? Obviously, because 320 is the larger number here, we are going to show you like why we started at the 320 and we go kind of line by line, right? So what they are, right? So this is the actual security requirements. I'm going to show you kind of the differences between NIST 800-171 Rev 2 and the 320 assessment objectives. So you might have a control, but then there might be multiple pieces to determine that that control was actually met. The purpose of the control is to define what must be accomplished, aka like the access control, like what must be defined within or accomplished within the access control, but then how that compliance is going to actually be evaluated for that control, right? If 3.5.3 says use multi-factor authentication, pretty simple, pretty vague. The assessment objective is what the auditor, aka the C3PAO, is actually going to assess towards, right? So MFA, multi-factor authentication, is very broad, but it's like what is actually going to be examined, right? So I'm going to go over here to, let's see, ownership analysis. So I'm going to give you an example. So in this one, 3.1.1 is, you're going to notice that there are 6 of these. 6 of these is the exact control. We're on control number one. But on control number one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts to it. The auditor is going to determine whether you have passed this control or not. They are going to look at these 6 things. A, the authorized users are identified. B, processes acting on behalf of authorized users are identified, right? And so you have to go through all these things just to prove the one control, right? So if I further elaborate, I've got these 320 things I have to go do from these 110 controls, right? So if I go back to my handy dandy flow down, the most important part of like where you should start is simply looking at the spreadsheet. Obviously, you'll be able to download this of what are these 320 assessment objectives and having your team, not just IT, right? Like some of these things are obviously IT related, but there's things that are ops related, there's HR related stuff. There's all, it's kind of like all different functions within the company. Everybody within the committee, within your company, go through the spreadsheet. It's extremely boring, right? But you just have to do it, right? You just have to do it. It's extremely boring and it's going to be time consuming to go through essentially 320 rows on a spreadsheet and determine like, all right, guys, like, do we really think we did this? All right. Like and some of these things, it's going to take you a really long time to kind of get through this. So to me, that's the most important part is it starts with a simple spreadsheet of just the, control number, the assessment objective, and then just trying, in another column, put in like a notes column, trying to identify you've actually done this or not, right? Like, have you identified this anywhere in like a policy, right? Have you identified this anywhere in your SSP or what have you, right? Or just having an honest conversation with guys, we actually think we did this, yes or no, yes or no, right? And that will kind of set the foundation for like almost like your own internal like gap assessment of determining, and you have to be really honest with yourself. Like, no, like if you think like maybe you're on the edge, like just write no or like a maybe, right? Because it is going to take you a while. So you work backwards from the 320 assessment objectives. So we have our nice spreadsheet. So now we know what we're looking at of what we need to do and what we need to prove. You then get to your 110 control. So you kind of work backwards. So this is kind of, really very similar 110 controls. The next part of the flow down is assigning ownership to each of these 320 objectives / 110 controls. Who within the company or which functions within the company, and you're going to have to assign each of these by name, right? So Dan the person, it's John, it's Sally, it's Susie, like it's Edward, like whoever it is, like that you have to figure out who's going to own it. And not necessarily just within the company, but if you are using an MSSP, an MSP, or a registered practitioner organization, like you're going to want to essentially build out a RACI or essentially a shared responsibility matrix regarding who's going to be the owner of each of these 320 assessment objectives, because it's not always clear and it's not always related to IT, right? So you're gonna have to go down line by line and kind of read. And again, like it's very boring and it's very long, but you're going to want to see who is going to own it, right? It can be lots of different people who can own it. It can be HR who can own it. It can be operations. It could be an MSSP, right? It could be a registered practitioner organization, right? But what's really important is being able to assign who should do these things. It's also very important that if you are an organization seeking compliance for CMMC Level 2 and having an external audit, it's very important that you take this RACI and you take your list of the 320 assessment objectives and you determine with each of your vendors which ones of these do you own. For example, let's say you're taking some meetings with a security incident event management software, a SIM software, right? Or a 24/7 SOC provider. You should be giving them this spreadsheet and you have to ask them which specific assessment objectives do you satisfy and own from this spreadsheet, because you as the organization seeking compliance needs to understand like, okay, if this vendor is telling me that this tool or product or whatever is going to cost me $5,000 a year, I need to know what percentage are you owning of the 320 that I need to know? Can I pull you in? Are you giving me the evidence? You got to know to what degree they're going to help you satisfy each of the assessment objectives, right? Like, how do I get the evidence for this? Like, what are you going to help me with specifically, right? And whether that's a person, a vendor, a tool, you're going to have to, kind of go line by line to determine how each of your vendors and internal people help you satisfy each of these, right? And to what degree. So that's the RACI. This will take a while, right? Like it will probably take you a long, weeks maybe, to and lots of internal meetings if you do this correctly, because it's a huge, huge undertaking. So once you have the RACI and once you've identified like, okay, here are the different pieces that I'm missing, here are the different gaps that I have. I don't have anybody owning like half of these, which is very normal, by the way. Once you look at who owns these things, maybe internal IT owns, let's say, a quarter or a third of these, but then they might own it, but they don't actually know how to go do it. It's which is possible. I know that I need to have an enclave that is ITAR compliance, for example. Well, I need to go buy a tool or a vendor hell needs to help me with that, right? Like I'm not going to go create, me as IT manager is necessarily going to go create all those things. So once you have the RACI and you are able to determine who owns what, this is now where you get into the documentation, right? So your SSP describes how each and every one of these 110 controls is satisfied. So what that means is basically you're going to go through, this control, and in that control, you're going to have to explain and answer all the parts of this question. Think of it in like long form format, right? You're taking like an SAT essay or what have you, but you also have to obviously explain things and show and identify things and show things within the SSP. This is why the system security plan is generally 3 to 700 pages, right? It's a very long document because as you can imagine, if you have to go through the exercise of having to do this for essentially 320 rows and the SSP is, like, let's call it more or less an aggregated version of answering all these things in Excel spreadsheet along with the evidence and all that stuff. You can see how it can take you a long time to go write that, right? Beyond the SSP, though, there are a lot of other documents. Okay, let me pull this one up. So generally, you are going to have one SSP, 36 policies and plans, and 46 procedures for a total of 83 documents. Now, this isn't like an exact science, but this is a very good checklist and a very good template for what you are most likely going to have to do to explain how you're doing everything. All of this combined, and the last piece is kind of like this evidence packet, right? All the logs, the screenshots, the how do I, get to this portal, all that kind of stuff. You're probably looking well into like 1,500 plus pages, all this stuff aggregated together. So in this checklist, so in the policies section, you're going to have policies and procedures for each of the different NIST family sections, right? So in access control, right? So if I go back to my spreadsheet, you're going to see here's all these different, here's the controls, right? So let's, control one basically. Then I'm have all my assessment objectives. But now, in order to prove that you're compliant with those things, you're going to do so in forms of policies and procedures. A policy is basically a Word document that is owned by different control owners, right? That is assigned to a specific control and essentially written out like an essay, more or less, of here's what we do and like here's how we do it, right? So essentially, if I were going to go take like a password policy, here is Acme Corp's, email policy. We require 14 characters for each SaaS tool or whatever that we need access to each account, right? Um, we use a Keeper Enterprise Password Vault to store everything that doesn't have single sign-on SSO. We use Microsoft's Entra ID for these things, blah, 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 right? Those are like your policies for that topic of the control family, right? Then the procedures is kind of like, all right, well, show me how you like enforce that, right? Show me the details of like, okay, you say you have 14 characters. Show me how you actually go enforce that for everybody and for all the different tools and blah, blah, blah. And then finally, once you have the like, this is the policy, this is how we do it. Finally is the proof, the evidence. Okay. Show me the screenshot inside Keeper Password Vault that everything has to be 14 characters. Show me the screenshot from Microsoft's Entra ID that everything must have 14 characters or whatever it is said in your policy, right? So you can see that this is becoming a lot of work because first you need to go through the Excel spreadsheet of here are all the assessment objectives. Okay, do we actually do them honestly? Yes or no? Now that we've gone through it, we need to assign an owner of all right, who is in the company or outside of the company via MSP or tools or whatever is going to help us own this. Then I need to write my plan, essentially my documentation for what the policy is, how I do it, and then the proof behind it, right? Which is the evidence package. So now we've written the SSP, the policies, the procedures. We've done all the documentation for these 320 assessment objectives. Now, the last piece is, again, the evidence. Okay, I wrote the policies. I said how we do it. Now I have to take the screenshots, the tickets, show proof that all your employees did the training. When did they do the training? What was the topic of the training? Can you prove they did the training? The evidence package itself can be easily like 700 plus pieces of evidence proving the thing from your procedures and policies. And so this all kind of flows down to the external audit, which is done by the C3PAO, right? The Certified Third Party Assessment Organization. And so these are the people that are going to audit your company and say, yes, they have met these 320 assessment objectives. How does that happen? The auditor will literally sit down with you and your entire team. You better have like 5 to 7 people there for all the different control owners, right? And they're going to go down line by line, exactly how it's shown here. They're like, all right, 3.1.1A, show me the policy. If it requires a procedure, show me the procedure. Now show me the evidence for each and every one of these. So that's kind of how you should think about CMMC as an organization. I hope that really like simplifies things. It's obviously a lot of work, but at least you can kind of work your way backwards in terms of it just starts with the spreadsheet. It starts with your 320 rows. You're going to read them line by line with your entire team. Someone from C-suites, honestly, everybody from your C-suite should be going through this. IT, operations, and HR, and going through these line by line and trying to honestly answer whether you truthfully do this, yes or no. Maybe put a maybe in each of the columns. Then you're going to try to address, well, how do we do each of these things, right? What is the gap from what we're doing today versus what we need to get? At that point, there's probably a conversation, it's right around this RACI and securities control conversation where most people are going to get stuck, right? Because it's not the SSP and the policies. Like what I would prevent you doing is you should not even tackle the SSP and policies and procedures and the evidence package until you've truthfully have completed these first 3 steps, right? Because a lot of people, what they want to go do is they want to like start in the middle where they start on the SSP, the policy and procedures and the evidence. But it's very possible that you're just wasting a bunch of time typing away at here's what we do when you might have to actually go change what you're doing, right? You might actually have to go buy new tools. You might have to go buy a new a new MSP. You might have to hire someone new internally. And that's going to change who owns stuff, how we do it. It's going to change what a policy is. And so it's better not to do all this duplicative writing. It's very common with organizations seeking compliance where they redo all this documentation stuff 2 to 3 times, right? And these are essentially fatty books, more or less 1,500 pages worth of stuff. And if you have to go redo that 2 to 3 times, you're going to have an awful time. You want to start from the spreadsheet and really go down one by one on all the rows and determine um, who owns what. And during this RACI conversation is mostly where a lot of the like new vendor conversations are going to be coming in, right? Because you're going to look at the assessment objectives. And essentially, if I go to this other tab called responsibility summary, in the case of BEMO, what you're going to find is different vendors are going to satisfy a group of different controls for you. Now, there's lots of different ways to kind of go do this. And the other thing is it's going to spur a lot of conversation. Let me pull up a different spreadsheet around the vendors that we need to go buy. It's very possible that there's a lot of assessment objectives that you are failing because you're like, wow, I need to go get a sim. And I can't satisfy these, let's call it 5, 10, 20 assessment objectives because I need a sim. And that is like it's I just can't satisfy this. Okay, well now you need to go get a sim. Oh wow. To satisfy these two other, assessment objectives, I really need like a cloud backup solution to be able to prove that I do this. And then I'm gonna need screenshots from the backup solution saying like, yes, it was backed up on X date or 24/7, blah, blah, blah. Right. You get the gist. But you won't really get to these conversations until you first do the RACI exercise within your organization to determine like what are we missing? Because it's very possible that you auto fail all of these assessment objectives depending on your company, because perhaps you have ITAR controls and you are on the commercial versions of all of these softwares, in which case you can say that you did it, but you're going to fail at the audit anyway because the tool itself is not compliant with ITAR, for example, right? During this RACI conversation, you're going to have a lot of dialogue come up internally around what we need to go buy in order to satisfy the remainder of these controls and assessment objectives. Now, it is very possible that with a managed service provider, so there's lots of different ways, again, to kind of get to CMMC level 2 compliance. One of those routes is with a CMMC level 2 certified MSP, MSSP, and RPO. Now, as of July 7th, 2026, when this is being recorded, there's only about, I think, 50 to 60 CMMC level 2 certified MSPs out there in the whole world. The way BEMO kind of looks at it, I should say, where how clients use BEMO is we have these three different packages. We have the classic MSP packages, so managed service provider, which is the classic help desk, line of business apps, that kind of thing. We have the MSSP services, which is the managed security services provider. So all the security controls related to NIST 800-171. And then you have what's called the RPO, so the Registered Practitioner Organization, which is essentially a certification from Cyber AV, which is the organization that gives out all of these certifications, right? Like things like CCA, RPO, C3PAO, right? C3PAO is one of those things. So BEMO can satisfy, or we can share the responsibility with you, the organization seeking compliance. And depending on which services you subscribe to, we could own up to 81% of the entire CMMC Level 2 program within your company. Now, you get to pick and choose which ones you need lift on. Security tends to be the biggest lift of where there is the most the largest gap in skill set internally of not knowing or never having experienced having to implement all of these let's call it FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP high tools in a way that is quick and efficient and able to get you to certification in time. It's very important that you go through these again, like line by line, right? But then when you assign ownership, you can assign ownership maybe on this tab and have the different people's names. And then you'll be able to see, oh, operations owns these controls, HR owns these controls. In this case, we're keeping it really simple with customer here, but your organization may not be as simple as this. You might have 5 different control owners internally within your organization, and then you might use an MSP. You may not use an MSP. It's kind of really up to you. But for let's call it SMBs with 10 to 2 to 300 employees, you probably don't have a lot of technical staff or a lot of experience doing this type of thing. And so oftentimes organizations seeking compliance will lean on an MSP, an MSSP, and or an RPO to kind of help them get over the line when it comes to the compliance readiness. So I hope this was really helpful. This is how you should be thinking about CMMC compliance, kind of working backwards from the audits. Don't start with the evidence and the policies and procedures. Start with going line by line with the assessment objectives and security controls and trying to determine who owns what. And then when you've determined the gaps that you have, that's when you start talking to vendors and you bring your shared responsibility matrix to all of these vendors and you tell them, which pieces of these 320 do you do and how are you going to help me get there, right? And like that, when you are equipped with that spreadsheet, you are no longer kind of doing all this hand waving when you're talking to vendors around like, oh, yes, we do X, Y, and Z. You literally show them the spreadsheet and you say, which things on here do you help me satisfy, right? It'll make it much more black and white and you won't be guessing going into your audits. So best of luck with your CMMC Level 2 journey. We'll talk to you soon.
That is another episode of Trust Issue. In this conversation, help you think differently about compliance, security, or trust. Share it to help someone who is still stuck in a checkbox mode. Each week, we will keep bringing you more episodes, resources, and real-world insight from the BEMO team. Wherever you are listening from, don't forget to rate the podcast and follow us to stay up to date on the latest development in the GRC space. Remember, compliance gets you certified, but real security, that earns trust. Thank you for listening.